It's Liz from G Mum's Place again, and I'm here today to review Rainwater by Sandra Brown, published in 2009. Read the synopsis. Acclaimed best-selling author Sandra Brown celebrates the spirit and determination that kept our country proud even through the Great Depression. In this moving tale of a bygone generation and a strong young widow who must rise above her circumstances, Ella Barron is determined that even the ravages of the Dust Bowl will not affect the well-ordered life she has built for herself and her special child, Solly, who lives in a world of his own that even she can't enter. Aware that he evokes pity and distrust, Ella holds herself aloof from her small community, but her new boarder, David Rainwater, comes into her life and changes it forever. As economic desperation creates bitter social unrest in the town and surrounding farms, Ella finds herself relying on Mr. Rainwater's soft-spoken advice and the steely resolve of his convictions. But tensions escalate in the summer heat until one violent night, everything they believe in will be put to the ultimate test. Sandra Brown's Rainwater is a poignant, lyrical novel that will speak straight to your heart. A story that bears witness to a powerful truth. Love is worth whatever price one must pay for it. I'll read the first few paragraphs. By any chance, is your pocket watch for sale? The old man raised his head. The woman asking about his watch was leaning across the glass display case, separating them. Inside the case were snuff boxes, hat pins, razors with bone handles, salt cellars with their dainty sterling silver spoons, and various pieces of jewellery recently acquired at an estate sale. But the woman's focus was on his watch. He guessed the woman and her husband to be in their mid-40s. To them, the gold timepiece probably looked dapper and quaint, Rockwellian. The couple were dressed in the preppy fashion of country club members. Both were trim and tanned, and they looked good together, as though they had come as a set. The man as handsome as his wife was attractive. They had arrived in a sleek SUV, which looked out of place on the dusty gravel parking lot in front of the antique store. In the half hour they'd been there, several items in his inventory had attracted their interest. The things they had decided to purchase were of good quality. As their appearances indicated, they had discriminating taste. The old man had been listing the items on a sales receipt when his customer posed the question about his pocket watch. He laid a protective hand over it where it rested against his vest and smiled. "No, ma'am, I couldn't part with my watch." She had the confidence of a pretty woman who was accustomed to beguiling people with her smile. "Not for any price. You don't see pocket watches like that these days. The new ones look, well, new. Shininess makes them appear phony and cheap, doesn't it? A patina like that on yours gives it character." The pocket watch that she's talking about is actually very old and expensive, and he won't part with it, and he explains why at the end of the book. And it is totally understandable why he would not part with that pocket watch. The next section of the book that I'd like to read to you is about young Solly, Ella's son. Solly would normally sit in the kitchen while Ella is doing the cooking or preparing things for her boarders, but all of a sudden he disappears. By mid-afternoon, Ella had pork chops braising on the stove and was putting finishing touches on a banana pudding when she realised that Solly was no longer in the kitchen with her. "Solly!" She burst out of the kitchen, raced down the centre hallway toward the front door, through which he'd ventured out once before. "In here!" She turned abruptly and retraced her steps, stopping when she reached the arched opening into the informal parlour. Mr. Rainwater was sitting on the floor, a set of dominoes scattered in front of him. Beside him was Solly, watching intently as Mr. Rainwater picked up a domino and stood it on end in perfect alignment with the previous one. What? Shh. He's okay. Watch. Any other time, she would resent being shushed, but she was so intrigued by Solly's apparent concentration. She stepped into the room and lowered herself onto the nearest chair, perching right on the edge of the seat. Mr. Rainwater continued to add dominoes to the snaking line he had formed on the hardwood floor. Solly's eyes followed every careful motion of his hand. I noticed last night how he was playing with the spools, stacking them, placing them in perfect juxtaposition. Although Mr. Rainwater was speaking to Ella, he didn't look up at her. His concentration on placing the dominoes just so was as intense as Solly's. Seeing that gave me this idea. To prevent any false impressions, she said quietly, "He does that with other things, Mr. Rainwater. Toothpicks, buttons, bottle caps, anything uniform in shape." Rather than dim his enthusiasm, which she had expected, her statement seemed to validate his optimism. "Really?" Smiling, he continued to add to the column of dominoes. Solly remained transfixed. He seemed not to notice that his knee was touching Mr. Rainwater's. When all the dominoes had been placed, Mr. Rainwater withdrew his hands and then sat motionless. Solly stared at the line of dominoes for the better part of a minute before he extended his index finger to the last one in the line and nudged it. It toppled, creating a contagion until all were down. Ella stood up. "Thank you for watching him." Mr. Rainwater raised his hand, palm out. "Wait." Moving slowly, he stretched out his hands and began to turn the dominoes over so that they lay with the dots down. Then he shuffled them as though he was about to start a game. When they were all spread out, he sat back again. "Your turn, Solly." The boy sat staring at the dominoes for a long time before he reached for one and stood it on its end. Ella knew that her son had responded not to his name, but to his mysterious inner urging to line up the dominoes. It was that trait, his insistence on uniformity and order, and his violent outbursts if things weren't in that particular order, that had first signalled her that he was different from other children. Normal children left their playthings helter-skelter. He wasn't always like he is now. Mr. Rainwater looked up at her. "He was a perfectly normal baby," she continued. "He nursed and slept on schedule. He cried only when he was wet or hungry or sleepy. The rest of the time he was content. He reacted normally to voices and sounds. He recognised me and his father, Margaret, the boarders who were living here then. We played patty cake and peekaboo. He laughed. He crawled at 9 months and walked at 13. He was just like every other baby. Even exceptional, I think, because I had him toilet trained soon after he turned 2, which is early for any child, but especially for boys, so I'm told." She looked down and realised that she was clutching her apron with both hands. She forced her fists to relax and let go, then smoothed out the wrinkles she'd made in the fabric. But during his 2s, when most children are asserting their independence and revealing their personalities, Solly seemed to retreat. He stopped responding when we tried to play games with him. Once his attention was focused on something, we couldn't draw it away, and he became very distressed when we tried. His interest in and awareness of what was going on around him decreased. His fits became more frequent. The rocking, the hand flapping became constant. For a time I could stop him, but then each day my sweet, smart baby boy slipped a little bit further away from me. She lifted her gaze from her lap to Solly. who was still lining up the dominoes, until he disappeared entirely. She looked at Mr. Rainwater and raised her shoulder. I never got him back. In this scene, they've taken Solly to the local doctor. And remember, most of the book is set in 1934. So before all the medical breakthroughs that we are used to. Ella felt her pulse rise when Mr. Rainwater went through the ritual of shuffling and turning the dominoes face down on the doctor's scarred desktop. But Solly performed as he had the day before. Dr. Kincaid shook his head in wonderment, then leaned back in his squeaky chair and made that startling and offensive statement. "Idiot savant." "Idiot savant?" Ella repeated. So this is how Ella found out that there's a chance that Solly is an idiot savant. Of course, there weren't terms like autism or autism scale around in those days either. Okay, in this scene, Mr. Rainwater has had a very bad night and day in dreadful pain, and she's called the doctor to see him. And she's decided to change his sheets after the doctor's left, because his sheets are all sweaty and grungy. So Mr. Rainwater says, "Take your time. I spent all night and all day in bed. I'm not anxious to return to it. I enjoy the view from here." After a moment he said, "I've been looking at the cottonwood tree across the street. When I was a boy, I climbed one that was as tall. One day I was about a third of the way up when I came across a raccoon that was foaming at the mouth. I had to drop to the ground or get bit. I broke my arm." "Better than getting rabies," Ella said. He gave a soft laugh. "It wasn't quick thinking on my part. The thing was hissing, scared the daylights out of me. My folks commended me for exercising good judgment by jumping, when in truth I was so frightened I actually fell out of the tree. It's a wonder I didn't break my neck." She smiled across at him. "Did you ever climb that tree again?" "As soon as my arm was healed. I had to in order to restore my pride." This is such a lovely book. It is just beautiful. In the beginning of this book, Sandra Brown tells us that she wrote this book in between contracted works as an extra because it was so very different from the book she had written for the last 20 years or so. The main section of the book takes place in 1934, when Ella Barron, a rooming house lady, and David Rainwater meet. They help each other through a very difficult time. Their story is exquisitely written and difficult for us to comprehend. It was a very different time to now. The dialogue is possibly a bit stilted to us now, but was very much the norm at that time. Probably through to the 60s, I would think. I seem to remember people talking in much the same way when I was little. Very polite and correct. I got a bit teary in certain parts of the book and laughed out loud in other parts, and at the end, especially with him climbing the tree. That was just gold. I have to give Sandra Brown 5 stars for this book, as I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a very difficult time for single mothers. Her pacing throughout the book was exactly right for its time period. I have a number of Sandra Brown books, so I will be doing more reviews of her work in the future. As always, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and smash the like button. And if you've got any questions or just want to say hi, please leave me a comment below, and I'll be talking to you soon. Thank you very much for watching the video.